And then, after a while, I had passed, I got this memo, which I published in the book, from the head of business affairs at Edinburgh, a man named Ed Pearlstein, who said, "Dear Leonard, for the past several weeks, I've been consulted with respect to the operation in regard to your personally handling your fan mail, and I have iterated myself many times with regard to the agreement that I made with respect to our obligation to you in this connection. For purposes of clarification, to you and the others receiving copies of this memo, I would like to iterate the agreement that was made. Desilu, in addition to your compensation, agrees to pay you $100 toward your secretary and equipment needs for your personally handling the fan mail. All equipment is to be furnished by you, other than that specifically enumerated herein below. We agree to furnish you the following: the photographs of you that we select, all postage with respect to fan mail, which the studio would normally cover under its existing fan mail facilities. Stationery, designated by Desilu for fan mail, and not your own personal, unapproved stationery. Envelopes will be furnished by Desilu. It is not intended, nor was it specifically agreed, that we would furnish you with pencils, pens, etc., which we assumed you would furnish yourself. From the requests that you have made, which I have rejected, which we will charge you for, items such as staplers, staples, pens, pencils, pencil sharpener, memo pads, special stationery, applications for memberships in Leonard Nimoy fan clubs. And any expense in connection with fan clubs is something that we are not responsible for, as this goes beyond the Star Trek series, and which I personally consider an item of a personal expense." And he goes on to say, "This is not a witch hunt." Oh, really? Anyway, he asked for any response if there are any questions, and I thought, a memo like this does call for a response. So the following day I said, "Dear Ed, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to send me your memo, clarifying or attempting to clarify our agreement as regards to fan mail, supplies, etc. My impression is that there are two primary issues raised in your memo. I should like to deal with them forthwith so that we may arrive at a satisfactory understanding. The first issue seems to be that which has to do with the provision of pens, pencils, etc. I hasten to assure you that my secretary and I have managed to steal enough pens and pencils from various offices around the studio. So we will no longer need to make requests in this area for some time. The second area deals with those expenses, and I quote from your memo, in connection with fan clubs. In this area, we may have to create a subdivision, since not all of the 160 fan clubs could in all fairness be considered completely personal. I list here with a few examples of some of the clubs which might fall out of the personal category. Crew of the Enterprise, Mobile, Alabama. Star Trek Association, Los Angeles, California. Spock, Los Angeles, California. The Star Trek Club, Jackson Heights, New York. Vulcanian Enterprises, Brooklyn, New York. Those are some examples of clubs which I feel fall most predominantly in the Star Trek area and cannot in all fairness be considered personal clubs. Then there are those which I feel we should split. For example, Nimoy Enterprise, San Jose, California. Leonard Spock Nimoy Fans, British Columbia, Canada. Yeoman Enterprises, Pontiac, Michigan. The name of the ship in this case being spelled forward and my name being spelled backward, perhaps we ought to go for a 75 versus 25% split at the expense. In fairness to all parties involved, may I suggest that we arrange for a periodic audit of the fan club files in order to determine where the expenses should rightfully fall. Perhaps Price Waterhouse would be available for such an audit, or we can arrange for a dramatic presentation of the findings in a sealed envelope. Yours for fair and equitable allocation of expenses, Leonard Nimoy. Now, Robert Justin, who was our associate producer during the first couple of seasons of the series and later producer of The Next Generation, wonderful guy with a great sense of humor. He saw these memos going back and forth. He joined the fray on June 14, 1960, and he said, "Dear Ed, I've received copies of correspondence between Leonard Nimoy and himself recently. With respect to Mr. Nimoy's memo on June 13th, I should like to report to you that I've noticed that pens and pencils have been disappearing from my office." Now I'm erased. I don't have proof, so I don't think that I can logically accuse anyone. However, I staked out my office the other night in an attempt to identify the guilty party. Unhappily, some unknown assailant sneaked up behind me and clamped a fiercely vice-like grip somewhere between my neck and shoulder. I lost consciousness within a split second and did not awaken until several minutes later. To my dismay, I noted there were more supplies missing from my body. Whoever attacked me and stole my supplies must have been endowed with a quite superior sense of hearing, as I am certain that I made no noise, and in fact was quite careful to breathe as lightly as possible. Incidentally, getting back to fan mail, this past season, I've received 3 fan letters. I answered them post haste. Please send me the money to cover the postage. The series was canceled at the end of the second season. There were 110,000 letters sent to NBC, the network, complaining about cancellation. NBC put the show back on for one more season, and then it was over. Or so we thought. And I expected that we would have a season or 2 of reruns, like most series, and then it would quietly go away. And it seemed to behave that way for the first couple of years. I went to work on Mission Impossible for a couple of seasons. And then suddenly, around 1971, 72, I began to be aware that I was getting more and more requests for interviews about Star Trek, more and more requests for appearances about Star Trek. The first Star Trek conventions took place. We expected a few hundred people, and thousands showed up. And there was suddenly, in the U.S. at least, this phenomenon, this news event was taking place, this extraordinary growth of the Star Trek audience, like an explosion. And the reason seemed to be that Star Trek was now available in syndication, which meant that local TV stations around the country could program the show at times that they felt were convenient for their local audience. They didn't have to take it at the time that the network chose to put on the air on the entire country, but could choose a time locally to play it. And a tremendous audience was developing. And now, this audience, which was watching it sometime every night, would be very often on in certain cities, 5 or 6 o'clock every night, or there were marathon showings starting at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning and running all the way through Saturday and into Sunday night, 20 or 30 episodes in a straight through run. College courses, hours were being changed to avoid competing with the Star Trek. It was amazing. And in fact, some creative professors in colleges were using Star Trek episodes as an example of the subject matter they were teaching. So they would show an episode in the class and then talk about what themes and what issues were being dealt with in the episode as part of the college curriculum. There was a tremendous hunger for new Star Trek, and there wasn't any. There was no new Star Trek. There were the 79 episodes that we had produced and no more. And people were the hunger was growing enormously. I likened it to, there was a show called, perhaps you saw it, called Little Shop of Horrors. There was a plant that needed to be fed constantly, and it was a talking plant that said something like, feed me, feed me. And that's what the Star Trek audience sounded like. Feed us, more Star Trek. There was hunger was out there. There wasn't any. There was nothing coming. I've been writing some books and poetry around that time. And my publisher said, would you be interested in doing a book about your Star Trek experiences? And I thought I could easily do that. I've been talking about it a lot to audiences around the country. And I think I know what the questions are that people are curious to have answered. And I sat down and wrote a book. The book had chapters such as a chapter on all my favorite episodes, how I got the job as Mr. Spock, how the makeup was developed, what effect Spock had on Star Trek had on my family and on my personal life, what effect it had on my career, other characters that I had portrayed before Spock that gave me a sense of how to portray anything, going all the way back to zombies in the stratosphere in 1950. It was another very interesting book, and I thought informative, and a rather kindly and loving book. I talked about the fact that I cared a lot about Star Trek.